Hello, scientists. So today we're going to be starting a new unit. You probably already know that because you took the pre-test. And make sure you do take that. I could really use that for data. And it's just for me to know how you guys are going to progress from the beginning of this unit to the end. So don't worry about that. But if you could, please make sure you take that by today. But as you can see, today we're going to talk about sexual reproduction. And I'm sure many of you might think this is an uncomfortable topic, but we're talking about sexual reproduction at a cellular level as well as an organism level, but we're talking about it in terms of characteristics. We're not talking about the process. This is more of what determines if it's sexual or maybe you heard of asexual reproduction. So we're just going to go through this together today. If you could just pull it up and fill out the questions. I believe there's only 2 of them, but if you could just follow along, we're going to go through this. This shouldn't be too long today, and we're going to have more practice with these terms and ideas later on this upcoming week as well. So this you don't need to worry about. Again, this is going to be only for if you're in class, so do not worry about it. Just some key terms that we're going to talk about throughout this unit that you're going to hear is sexual reproduction, asexual reproduction, something called meiosis or meiosis. It can be called that in both terms. It could be said either way. Then there's sperm, egg, fertilization, zygote, budding, cloning, fission, regeneration, and vegetative reproduction. Again, we're going to go through these at different parts of the unit, so you don't have to learn all these today. Okay, so sexual reproduction can be defined as a type of reproduction in which the genetic material from 2 different cells combine and produce an offspring. Well, that kind of sounds like a lot. An easier way to think about this is sexual reproduction is when 2 different organisms come together and create a new cell or an offspring that is genetically different from the parents. So 2 different parents with 2 different types of genetics come together and they're going to produce an offspring, but the offspring is not identical to the parents. That's all sexual reproduction is. So within sexual reproduction, 2 cell types are used. There's the egg, which is the female sex cell, and then there's sperm, which is the male sex cell. And when they come together and fertilize, they form a new cell called a zygote. And eventually the zygote has other terms such as embryo and such as it develops, and it will become an offspring. So again, female is egg, male is sperm, and together they form that zygote. But let's think of this first and foremost in terms of the cellular level, because we've been talking about cells recently. So again, this is meiosis. But what's interesting about meiosis is it's a type of cell division, but it creates those sex cells, so sperm or egg. And it's actually going to create 4 different cells from one cell. One cell is going to create 4 different cells, but they are going to be completely, again, different from the parent, but they are meiosis is only used for the reproductive cells. It's not used for, say, your skin cells or your hair cells, bone, any of that. That does not reproduce by measures of meiosis. Only your sperm and the egg cells are going to be created through meiosis. So we're going to go through these steps together. There's going to be a lot of information with this, but we're actually going to go into this at a different unit as well. So this one, I just kind of want to give you some prior knowledge so you can kind of understand what meiosis is, but you might actually recognize it from what we talked about on Monday when I talked about a certain organelle. So stay tuned with that. So what organelle that only animals have creates those spindles during meiosis? Remember, this is going to be the characteristic. This structure, is only going to be found in animals. It's that organelle we talked about on Monday. Remember, it creates spindle fibers, pulling chromosomes apart. So what is that organelle? And you can just write there in the blue box. Remember, don't be in present mode, so you can type in that. If you haven't guessed yet, that's going to be the centrioles, which we already talked about. So the stages of meiosis. There's actually meiosis 1 and meiosis 2. And you're going to find out that they're practically the same thing. It's just basically a repeat of all the steps. So there's prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. They're big words, but the best way to remember them is through PMAT. P-M-A-T. PMAT. So let's break this down. I promise it's a lot simpler than it looks. So in prophase 1, the nuclear membrane is going to break apart. Remember, the nucleus holds that genetic material, and the membrane is what held that nucleus together. Well, if that breaks, all of that DNA is going to flood out into the cell. So that's what happens during prophase. In metaphase 1, the chromosomes are going to start to line up in the middle of the cell, and then the centrioles are going to start creating those spindle fibers. Remember from that drawing that I had on the board on Monday? This is where they're all going to be in the middle, and the spindle fibers are going to start to form and reach out towards those X's. And those X's are chromosomes, and chromosomes are going to be the genetic material, or are like they're made up of DNA. And so they're going to have our genetic material and characteristics. It's all going to be in those little X's called chromosomes. So they're going to line up and spindle fibers are formed. And then in anaphase, the chromosomes are going to be split apart. They're going to separate, and they're going to be pulled to opposite ends of the cells by those spindle fibers. And then finally, in telophase, a new nuclear membrane is going to form around those chromosomes, and the cytoplasm is going to divide down the middle. So that's going to go bloop, and you're going to have two separate cells. And these are called daughter cells, not because they're female, but because they're an offspring of the original cell. So that's meiosis 1. And you're going to realize meiosis 2 is like the same thing. It even has the same name except it's prophase 2, metaphase 2, anaphase 2, and telophase 2. And the same thing is going to happen, except it's going to be those two new cells that we had are going to split again. So again, the nuclear membrane is going to break apart. All that genetic material is going to flood out into the cell. Your chromosomes in metaphase are going to line up in the middle, and the spindle fibers from the centrioles are going to begin to form. In anaphase, the chromosomes are going to be separated and pulled in those opposite directions to opposite ends of the cell. And finally, in telophase, the nuclear membrane is kind of going to get patched back up in each of the cells and combine the genetic material back into the nucleus again. And the cytoplasm divides, and whoop, now you have 4 cells. Because remember, the 2 that you had, each are going through this process. So 2 then becomes 4. So you're going to have a total of 4 daughter cells at the end of meiosis 2. So this is just some images of the different stages to kind of help better explain what I just talked about. Again, you're going to have your genetic material inside, and the nuclear membrane is going to split open. And then in metaphase, it's going to start to line up in the middle of the cell, and spindle fibers are formed. In anaphase 1, or even in anaphase 2, you're going to see that the spindle fibers are going to pull these X's, or these chromosomes, remember the genetic material, in opposite directions to opposite sides of the cell. And then the nuclear membrane is going to reform, and the cell's going to split in telophase. And then in prophase 2, you can see this is going to be one of these cells from telophase is then drawn down here in prophase 2. And the whole, I don't know what I want to say right now. I lost the word. But basically, the cells are going to just go through that whole process again. The cycle is going to continue. That's what I wanted to say. The cycle is just going to repeat. So, some advantages of sexual reproduction. The big one, genetic variation, also known as genetic diversity. It allows for differences among organisms. And this is very important for organism or species survival. So imagine you have a bunch of bugs and they're all green. And then there happens to be a drought, and all the plants are dying and they're dead and they're brown. Well, these green bugs that used to live among the green grass are going to be really easily seen, and their species is going to be disappeared because the birds can easily pick them up and eat them. Compared to if you had the same set of bugs and there was brown bugs and green bugs, both of the same species, and the drought happens again, well, all the brown bugs are going to blend in with the grass, but all the green bugs are going to be easily seen. So they're going to be selected and eaten up, but the brown bugs that were best suited for that environment, they're going to survive and be able to pass on those genes. So that's basically what genetic diversity or variation is. Another one is selective breeding, and this is the ability to choose desirable traits. So this is really seen actually in food, where you have like two plants where one is, it grows really fast, and then another plant, say, produces really large fruit. And well, if you put the two of them together, that it grows fast and produces large fruit, combine them through sexual reproduction, through selective breeding, you may create a plant that has big fruit as well as grows really fast. So both of those are combining two positive traits to form maybe an even better outcome. So those are some advantages to selective breeding and for sexual reproduction. So really quickly, what is one organism that you can see genetic diversity and how can you tell? So make sure you write your answer there in the purple box. Remember, don't be in present mode. But the one organism that you can really see some genetic diversity, look around. It could be anything. It could be humans. You know, maybe your sibling has brown hair and you have blonde hair. It could be animals. A dog has black fur or it has, you know, white fur. It could be eyes. It could be size of differences of heights. Anything like that is going to be a type of genetic diversity and very important for the ecosystem. Some disadvantages of sexual reproduction. One, the organism must find a mate. That's really hard because there might not be a mate around. You know, there might be a loss of males in the environment. And so it's going to take time and energy for the organism to find a mate. Two, it takes longer to reproduce. One, organisms actually have to reach sexual maturity, and that takes a decent amount of time. And then not only that, it takes a lot longer to reproduce in general. Think about humans. It takes 9 months for a baby to be born. So that takes a long time. Another disadvantage, you can prevent favorable genes from being passed on. So say the male in the population of deer has a genetic disorder that causes him to not be able to hear well. Well, that's going to be continuously passed down if he's the only male in that ecosystem for which those females can reproduce with. And finally, 4, it produces fewer offspring. So there's less offspring being produced, which think about humans typically only have one child, and it takes 9 months to get one. This is a lot different than you'll see from asexual reproduction. So finally, real quickly to wrap this up, some examples of sexual reproduction that occur. Remember, meiosis, that's going to occur at the cellular level and create sex cells. 2, animals. Any type of animal that you see is going to reproduce through sexual reproduction. And finally, 3, certain plants actually undergo sexual reproduction. And the way that you can tell if a plant undergoes a type of sexual reproduction is by whether or not they have a flower. So the flower actually holds the reproductive organs for plants, at least ones that have a flower. And as you can see, there's something called a stamen here. They're going to be these long green pole-like things. They're going to basically act as the male reproductive organs for the plant. And this anther, which is like a little ball on the top of it, holds pollen. And pollen actually acts as like reproductive cells that need to be transferred from the male to the female in order for reproduction to occur. And so if a bee comes along, drinks some nectar, happens to get some pollen on it, and then it also travels around here and happens to touch this thing called a pistil, which is this big middle part, that's the female reproductive organ of the plant. And so it actually fertilizes it through the pollen, and then another plant can be grown, it can create seeds or whatever it needs to, and it has become fertilized. And remember, that's the process through fertilization, and it's going to create a whole new organism. So plants are a little confusing. We'll also talk about other plants as well. Not every plant undergoes sexual reproduction. All right, so that concludes today's lecture. If you just want to remember to submit this on PowerPoint on Schoology, and we'll have much more practice with this, and we're also going to learn about asexual reproduction on Monday. So I will see you then. Bye, scientists.